Imagine yourself in a city. The sky is gray, heavy with coal smoke. The streets are narrow and wet, etched with the grooves of carriage wheels and muddy footprints. The air is a blend of burning coal, human sweat, and something sharper still. The unmistakable scent of waste with nowhere proper to go. This is London during the height of the Victorian era. But we won't be strolling through royal gardens or attending glittering ballroom dances. We'll be walking into the shadowed side of that splendor. Into the narrow lanes known as slums, crowded districts where life pulsed with quiet desperation, mostly ignored by official histories. Through 4 segments, we will immerse ourselves in what lay behind the lace curtains of empire. From child labor and nighttime fears to the late arrival of sanitation and the polite clinking of teacups behind closed parlor doors. Take a slow breath, and let us begin in a small attic room. Being a child seamstress in a cramped room, the room is no larger than 6 steps by 4. The ceiling low enough that adults must hunch to move about. A single dusty window allows in a dim sliver of light. And here, children sit on hard wooden benches, needles in hand, eyes bent over folded cloth. Imagine yourself, 8, maybe 9 years old. Your tiny fingers already calloused from thread and needle. In winter, your breath fogs in the freezing air. In summer, you sweat in the stifling heat. Yet the work never stops. Stitch after stitch, piece by piece, for elegant dresses you will never wear and likely never see worn. They were part of what was called sweated labor. Children working 10 to 14 hours a day, sometimes more. No playtime, no education. They worked for family, for survival, for a dinner of cold potatoes or crusts of dry bread. The room might house a large family as well as serve as a workplace. A baby cries in the corner. A mother sews while nursing. A father, perhaps, is off searching for work or sleeping off a long night shift. The cloth isn't silk. More often, it's coarse cotton or cheap wool, stitched quickly to be sold fast. A mistake could mean punishment, ... or a reduced wage. Time crawls in such a place. The ticking clock drowned by the snip of scissors, the tug of thread, and the occasional deep cough from across the room, a cough that never quite fades. Lungs worn thin by dust and damp air. And if you looked out that tiny window, you'd see a narrow alley, perhaps an open drain below. And other children working too. No schools, no playgrounds. Only days upon days, stitching dreams too distant to ever reach. Jack the Ripper and fear in dark alleys. Imagine a night so silent, accompanied only by the soft echo of a woman's footsteps on slick cobblestones beneath the flickering glow of gas lamps in a shadowy alley of Whitechapel. The air was laced with a light fog, drifting slowly. Each breath formed a tiny cloud that vanished into the cold. In the distance, a dog howled faintly, but in the narrow, crowded streets of East End London, the most terrifying sound was a silence too perfect. This was the emotional landscape of the lower classes in late 1880s London, a time when fear came not only from hunger or disease, but also from an unknown figure they came to call Jack the Ripper. Whitechapel, an overpopulated district of tenement housing. crammed pubs and maze-like alleys was the birthplace of this grim legend. Many lived with 8 to 10 others in a single, unventilated room. The air was thick with the scent of cheap tobacco, stale sweat, and laundry that never fully dried. Jack the Ripper wasn't merely a criminal tale. He became a symbol of despair, inequality, and a system that failed to protect its most vulnerable. His victims were women living at the margins of society, not just economically, but in the eyes of the world around them. On the nights of his crimes, silence turned into unrest. Whispers passed door to door, faces peeked out of cracked windows, and every footstep became suspicious. No one knew who he was, a doctor, a butcher, or perhaps just a shadow shaped by collective fear. Mounted police patrolled, but a sense of unease hung in the air like the unshifting fog. In that fear, the alleys seemed darker, doors locked sooner, and nights felt unbearably long. What touches most deeply, however, are the lives of the victims before tragedy struck. They were not just names and headlines. They were women trying to find a warm meal, laughing with friends, sleeping through the cold with hope for a better morning. Their lives were portraits of poverty, rarely chronicled except when they were found lifeless. Among dark alleyways and echoing steps, people learned not to hope too much. They looked down, walked faster, and prayed quietly that tonight wouldn't be their turn. And slowly, Whitechapel became known not only for its squalor, but also for the shadow that clung to it, a fear that was unseen, yet always present. Discovery of the excretory system and its impact on health. Imagine walking through the streets of Victorian London during a humid summer. The air feels heavy, not just with heat, but with something sharper. A pungent, warm smell that cannot be ignored. The scent of human waste, animal droppings, and stagnant gutter water combined into an invisible fog that filled the city's lungs. Before modern sewage systems were introduced, life in London was a daily battle against odor and disease. Most homes lacked toilets. Instead, people relied on private small backyard pits or even buckets, which were emptied out of windows with a customary warning shout. Guard loo. There were no underground pipes. Waste flowed through open gutters, mingling with rainwater, blood from slaughterhouses, and industrial runoff. Rats thrived freely, and flies buzzed around every market stall and alley corner. In 1858, London experienced what became known as the Great Stinkin', overpowering stench from the River Thames that brought Parliament nearly to a standstill. Lawmakers who once dismissed sanitation issues could no longer ignore them. And from that crisis emerged a pivotal figure, civil engineer Joseph Bazalgette. With tireless dedication, Bazalgette designed a revolutionary underground sewage system. A vast network of tunnels carried waste away from the city and out to distant treatment sites. It wasn't just a feat of engineering, it marked a shift in how society understood public health. Before the sewers, cholera was simply a part of life. Outbreaks swept through poor neighborhoods, and many doctors still believed in the miasma theory that disease came from foul-smelling air. Only when Dr. John Snow traced cholera outbreaks to contaminated water did understanding begin to change. Installing the sewer system didn't fix everything overnight. It took years for public trust to build. But gradually, mortality rates began to fall. The city grew healthier, though it was far from clean. Even with this progress, life remained harsh for the working class. They still lived in cramped quarters, bathed with buckets, and drank water from sources shared with neighbors suffering from dysentery. Yet the sewer system brought new hope. For the first time, there was a systemic effort to improve living conditions for all, not just the wealthy. Imagine the sound of hammers and shovels, dusty-faced workers digging trenches, and massive brick-lined channels slowly joining beneath a city that never rested. Above, children played in muddy streets. But below ground, the foundations for a healthier future were quietly taking shape without applause. Without monuments, just the gentle gurgle of waste, finally having somewhere to go. Afternoon tea, silk dresses, and the wall of social separation. Now imagine yourself rising from the narrow alleys and damp basements of London, stepping into a grand home in Kensington or Mayfair. Tall windows overlook private gardens, Persian rugs stretch across polished wooden floors, and the soft afternoon light dances on delicate porcelain cups. This is an entirely different world, yet only a few streets away from the stinking, shadowed slums. Here, afternoon tea is served in quiet ceremony. At a small round table, women in silk gowns sit upright, gloved hands lifting their teacups with a grace they were taught since girlhood. Tiered trays display scones, strawberry jam, and thick Devonshire cream, each delicacy arranged with care. What we now consider a comforting ritual was then a statement of class. Afternoon tea was not merely a habit, it was a performance of status. Only those free from physical labor in the late afternoon had the time for such leisure. Only those with a home large enough to separate a drawing room from the dining room could host guests properly. The gowns worn were not just clothes, they were declarations. Made of imported silks or intricate lace, with corsets tightened until breath itself became a discipline. Women sat in painful elegance, each movement refined, each smile measured. Even silence was part of the script, an ongoing play of representation, family pride, and societal expectation. But behind the lace curtains and crystal chandeliers, the dividing walls remained firm. Servants stood silently in the corners, unseen and unheard. They moved with precision, spoke in whispers if at all. And when the guests left, they returned to their windowless rooms below stairs, preparing the next meal for people who never had to know where their food came from. Social inequality in the Victorian era was not merely visible, it was architected. Separate staircases for servants, hidden doors in hallways, and meal schedules designed to prevent the classes from meeting. The wealthy lived atop a world held up by the poor, and both were expected never to touch. Imagine a ball in a brightly lit ballroom. The orchestra plays gently, silk gowns twirl in rhythm, and laughter ripples through the air. But outside the window, a bread delivery boy watches quietly. His hands dusted with flour, and his heart familiar only with warmth from loaves he never tasted. This contrast is what makes the Victorian era so layered. Progress, innovation, and splendor coexisted with hunger, child labor, and rotting tenements. The world of afternoon tea and silk gowns was not merely an aesthetic, it was the polished face of a system built on careful separation. a system in which a few lived at leisure, while many more simply dreamed, separated by walls of cold brick. Now, let us take a slow breath and step back to view the full portrait of the Victorian era. Over the past 2 hours, we've walked through narrow alleys and peeked into the cramped workspace of a child tailor. We've immersed ourselves in the fear that cloaked London's streets at night, where shadows of Jack the Ripper moved through the fog. We followed the path of foul water that led to the invention of a sewer system, one that slowly reshaped the city's health. And finally, we sat quietly in a drawing room, sipping afternoon tea while contemplating the invisible yet ever-present divide between classes. The Victorian era, so often remembered for its scientific achievements, artistic movements, and industrial progress, was also a time when human life was deeply shaped by its place in the social hierarchy. Every corner of the city, from mold-scented basements to glittering ballrooms, held its own stories, its own aromas and echoes of real lives. What may be most striking is how all of it coexisted. Splendor and suffering were not divided by decades or countries, but by a few paces and a single closed door. Behind the lace curtains and velvet rugs, the same human heartbeat pulsed hunger, ambition, love, and despair, all quietly human. And now you are in a place of safety, a place where you can close your eyes and let that harsh world fade away. Outside your window, there may be only stillness, now far from the cries of the slum markets or the creaking wheels of a horse-drawn cart. And perhaps, in your dreams tonight, you'll walk again through London's cobbled streets, but this time with light steps and calm. Let history be your lullaby, not to disturb, but to remind us that the world has changed, and that in every age, people have always tried to find light in darkness, warmth in the cold, and hope in the weight of the everyday. Thank you for joining this journey. May your night be restful and your dreams filled with the gentle whispers of the past. Good night,